The rain fell like 1,000 tiny knives slicing through the neon haze of the city night. Dean trudged down the narrow alley, his boots splashing in puddles that reflected fractured lights from distant billboards, reds and blues bleeding together like old bruises. His parole papers stuffed deep in his jacket pocket felt heavier than chains, a constant whisper of the freedom that wasn't really his. The air was thick with the scent of wet asphalt and rotting garbage, a metallic tang that clung to his throat like regret. He kept his head down, shoulders hunched against the storm, his mind a blank slate etched with nothing but the rhythm of his steps. Inside, though, a storm raged quieter than the one overhead. Why bother? This world's just another cell. The city hummed around him, indifferent, its pulse mocking his own slow, labored barely there. But then, from the shadows ahead, a faint sound pierced the downpour, a low, ragged whine like wind through cracked glass. It pulled at something buried in him, a thread of curiosity in the numbness. Dean paused, rain dripping from his brow, his breath fogging the air. The alley seemed to narrow the walls, closing in like judges in a courtroom. He scanned the darkness, heart ticking faster, unaware that this moment was the first crack in his armored solitude. The alley stretched like a vein through the city's underbelly, flanked by towering brick walls, scarred with graffiti tags of forgotten gangs, symbols of power long eroded by time and neglect. Dumpsters overflowed with refuse, their lids ajar, like gaping mouths spilling out sodden newspapers and broken bottles that glinted under the sporadic flicker of a faulty street lamp. Rain hammered down, turning the cracked asphalt into a slick mirror where oil slicks swirled in iridescent patterns, mimicking the chaos of Dean's thoughts. The air hung heavy, laced with the acrid bite of exhaust from the main street beyond, and the faint sour rot of decay that seeped from every shadow. Chain-link fences rattled in the wind, their rusted links whispering threats of confinement echoing the prison bars Dean had left behind only weeks ago. Far-off sirens wailed like wounded animals, a soundtrack to this forsaken corner where hope came to die. Amid it all, a silhouette materialized against the base of a dumpster. A large dog fur matted and dark crouched low as if the ground itself were pulling it under. Its eyes caught a stray beam of light flashing amber with a wary intelligence that cut through the gloom. The German shepherd's form was lean, almost spectral ribs, faintly visible beneath the soaked coat, a scar tracing its flank like a lightning bolt frozen in flesh. The setting pressed in oppressive and alive, as if the alley were breathing, waiting for Dean to notice how it mirrored his own scarred existence, the decay outside matching the rot within. Danger lurked not just in the shadows, but in the pull of those eyes, promising a disruption to his fragile routine, a threat wrapped in vulnerability. Dean's steps faltered as the whine echoed again, softer this time, like a plea swallowed by the rain. He leaned against the cold brick wall, the chill seeping through his jacket, mirroring the numbness that had settled in his bones since the prison gates clanged shut behind him. Freedom. This is just a longer leash. He thought his mind a whirlwind of unspoken fury. The scar across his ribs throbbed with every breath, a jagged line of fire from that night in the yard when a shiv had come too close, a gift from Vito's inside man, he was sure now. He clenched his fists, nails digging into palms, fighting the urge to punch the wall, to shatter something outside himself for once. His reflection in a nearby puddle stared back, distorted and fragmented eyes hollow like abandoned wells. What's the point? Parole says stay clean, but clean means alone. No family waited for him. They'd scattered like rats after his arrest, Vito's setup erasing any ties. He kicked at a loose bottle, sending it skittering into the shadows with a hollow clink, the sound too small against the vast emptiness inside. But the dog's presence lingered, a silent watcher that stirred an unwelcome empathy. Why care? You've got nothing left to give. Yet his feet wouldn't move forward, rooted by an invisible weight, his breath coming in shallow rasps. The rain blurred his vision, or maybe it was something else, pricking at his eyes, a vulnerability he hadn't allowed since the slam of cell doors. In that moment, Dean felt the cracks widening his defenses, crumbling not with a roar, but with a whisper, the alley's decay echoing his own quiet unraveling. The dog's eyes still hidden, but felt pulled at him like a magnet to rust, promising nothing but more pain. Dean squinted into the gloom, the rain easing for a breath, revealing twin amber gleams low to the ground, eyes that pierced the shadows like embers in ash. The German shepherd didn't stir its body, a coiled statue breath visible in faint puffs that mingled with the mist. Dean's heart skipped a flicker of recognition in those watchful orbs, as if the dog saw straight through his tough exterior to the scarred mess beneath. "What the hell are you looking at?" He muttered under his breath, the words hanging in the air like smoke. He took a half-step closer, then froze the dog's unblinking stare, holding him captive, a mirror to his own guarded soul. There was no bark, no growl, just that profound stillness, a hesitation that spoke volumes. Dean's hand twitched at his side, instinctively reaching for something, a weapon, a lifeline, but finding only empty air. The moment stretched electric, the alley's whispers fading into a hush. "You're as beat up as me, aren't you?" Dean whispered, his voice cracking the silence like thin ice. The dog tilted its head ever so slightly, a gesture so subtle it could have been the wind, but it landed like a promise change was clawing its way in, whether he wanted it or not. The rain resumed its assault, but Dean lingered, the eyes in the dark, etching themselves into his mind, a harbinger of a bond forged in shared darkness. The past clung to Dean like chains forged in fire, dragging him back even as he stood frozen in the alley's grip. Years ago, under the harsh glare of streetlights much like these, he'd run with Vito's crew, a pack of wolves in human skin, scavenging the city's underbelly for scraps of power and cash. Vito had been the alpha, his switchblade, a gleaming extension of his will, slicing through rivals and loyalties alike. Dean, young and hungry, had pledged himself to that world, tattooing his arm with the gang's mark as if it could fill the void left by a father who'd vanished in a haze of booze and debt. But betrayal came swift as a blade in the dark. During a botched deal in a warehouse reeking of oil and fear, Vito had set him up. Whispers of a snitch planted evidence, cops swarming like flies to blood. Dean's arrest was a spectacle. Handcuffs biting into wrists, Vito's eyes cold and distant from the shadows, a faint nod sealing the frame. Prison swallowed him whole, a concrete abyss where days blurred into nights of violence. The scar across his ribs, a souvenir from year 3, when Vito's inside man cornered him in the showers, the shiv flashing like lightning. For Vito, the attacker had hissed, plunging deep before Dean fought back, blood mixing with water on the tile floor. It healed, crooked, a twisted reminder of trust shattered. Emerging from those gates weeks ago, Dean was a ghost of that vital youth. Muscles hardened but spirit-fractured, regrets piling like unanswered letters. I was loyal. He thought now, rain tracing paths down his face like tears he refused to shed. And for what? A scar and solitude. The alley's decay mocked him, graffiti echoing old gang tags, pulling him deeper into the mirror of his emptiness. Shade's eyes, still watching, stirred a flicker. Perhaps not all chains were unbreakable. Dean's days post-parole were a monotonous loop, a cage disguised as open air where freedom tasted like ash. He rose before dawn in his cramped apartment, a one-room hole above a laundromat that hummed incessantly like the doubts in his head. The walls were bare, save for a single cracked mirror. He avoided its reflection, a stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes shadowed by loss. Breakfast was black coffee, bitter and scalding, swallowed standing at the sink while he stared out at the fire escape rusted bars, framing a slice of gray sky. Stay clean, the parole officer had drilled, or back you go. So he clocked in at the warehouse night shift, hauling crates under fluorescent lights that buzzed like accusations, his scar itching with every lift, a phantom pain from Vito's long reach. Human contact was minimal, grunts to co-workers, nods to the boss, solitude his only companion. Evenings blurred into nights of pacing the floor, fists clenched against the urge to seek out old haunts, to confront Vito and demand why. Why me? Why the setup? But he swallowed it, burying the rage in silence. The apartment's emptiness, a perfect echo of his soul furniture, sparse a mattress on the floor, no photos to remind him of what was lost. The numbness was armor thick and unyielding, protecting him from the world but trapping him within. In the dim recesses of Shade's memory, the world had always been a cage of teeth and chains, forged under Vito's unyielding grip. Born in a dingy backyard breeder's pen, His early days were a blur of hunger and snarls, siblings fighting for scraps, while the scent of fear hung thick in the air. Vito had plucked him from that litter like a ripe fruit, seeing potential in the pup's sharp eyes and sturdy build, a German shepherd destined not for loyalty to a family, but for the brutal arena of underground fights. The training began young, chained to a post in a warehouse that reeked of blood and sweat. Vito's men prodded him with sticks, forcing growls from his throat until aggression became instinct. Fight or die, the lessons hammered each lash of the whip, etching deeper into his flesh. Shade's coat, once sleek and black tan, grew matted with scars, the most prominent a jagged line across his flank from a particularly savage bout, claws and fangs tearing as the crowd roared, betting slips fluttering like confetti in hell. Dean and Shade stood as echoes of each other in the alley's gloom, two souls hollowed by the same cruel hand, their emptiness a shared language spoken in silence. Dean's scar, a twisted ridge under his shirt, throbbed in rhythm with Shade's flank wound, both inflicted in arenas of violence, prison yard versus fighting ring, but the pain identical, a burning reminder of betrayal's bite. Dean's eyes, shadowed by years of isolation, met Shade's amber gaze, each reflecting the other's wariness, like mirrors cracked but aligned. We're both running from the same ghost, Dean thought, his internal monologue a whisper against the rain, recognizing in the dog's crouched form his own defensive hunched shoulders tensed against invisible blows. Shade's fur, matted and scarred, paralleled Dean's tattooed skin marks of loyalty turned to chains. Vito's influence a common thread weaving their fates. The storm unleashed its fury as Dean edged closer to the dumpster, lightning cracking the sky like a whip, illuminating the alley in stark, blinding flashes. Rain hammered down in sheets, turning the ground into a treacherous river of mud and debris, the wind howling through the narrow passage like a beast unleashed. Shade's form came into full view, a German shepherd trembling not just from cold but from fresh wounds, blood streaking his matted fur, mixing with the downpour in rivulets that pooled crimson at his paws. His scar, that jagged mirror to Dean's own, glistened wetly raw and exposed as if the rain had reopened old hurts. The dog's eyes locked onto Dean's wide with a mix of defiance and desperation, his body low and tense hackles raised against the chaos. A distant rumble of thunder masked the growl building in Shade's throat, but his posture screamed urgency, ears flattened, tail tucked, every muscle coiled, as if expecting the next blow. Behind him, the faint screech of tires echoed from the main street, a car's headlights slicing through the gloom like searchlights hinting at pursuers closing in. Dean's pulse thundered in his ears, the visual shock hitting like a gut punch. This wasn't just a stray, but a fighter on the run, bloodied and broken, the scent of fear and iron thick in the air. Sensory overload gripped him, the cold sting of rain on his skin, the metallic tang of blood, the dog's labored breaths cutting through the storm's roar. He's dying out here. Dean's mind raced, the urgency coiling tight in his chest, the chaos of the night forcing a decision he wasn't ready for. Shade whimpered softly, a sound lost to the wind, but etched in Dean's soul, pulling him into the eye of the storm. Dean's boots rooted to the slick asphalt, the storm's fury mirroring the turmoil raging inside him as he stared at Shade's bloodied form. Walk away. Logic snarled, a cold voice honed by prison survival parole, hung by a thread, one wrong move, and Vito's shadow or the cops would drag him back. Caring meant risk attachment, a weakness Vito had exploited before turning loyalty into a noose. His scar burned under his shirt, a phantom ache reminding him of the cost of trust. You've got nothing to give and everything to lose. But empathy crept in like the rain seeping through his collar, Shade's eyes pleading in a way that pierced his armor, stirring memories of his own isolation in the yard, beaten and alone. He's just like you, scarred running. The softer voice whispered compassion clashing with fear, his fists clenching at his sides. The dog's subtle sign, a faint tail twitch, not aggression but surrender, tipped the scale, a silent admission of vulnerability that echoed Dean's buried need for connection. What if no one had given you a chance? The internal argument piqued logic's grip, slipping as the headlights grew closer, the urgency forcing a shift. Fear of caring warred one last time, But Shade's whimper, raw and real, shattered the hesitation, pulling Dean toward a choice that felt like jumping off a ledge. Dean's hesitation shattered like glass underfoot as another flash of lightning lit Shade's trembling form, the blood stark against his fur. With a curse swallowed by the wind, he lunged forward, dropping to one knee in the mud, his jacket already half off. "Easy, boy," he muttered, voice rough but steady, extending the fabric like a makeshift shield against the rain. Shade growled, low teeth bared in a flash of white, snapping at the air inches from Dean's hand, a warning born of too many betrayals. Dean recoiled, but didn't retreat, his own scar pulsing as if in solidarity. "We're both fighters. I get it." Rain blinded him, mixing with sweat as he inched closer, the alley's chaos amplifying every move, the splash of puddles, the metallic scent of blood sharper now. Imperfectly, he draped the jacket over Shade's back, the dog flinching, but not bolting, a messy tangle of limbs and fabric, as Dean scooped him up, muscles straining against the weight. Shade thrashed once, claws scraping Dean's arm, drawing a thin line of blood that mingled with the storm, but then went still, perhaps sensing the shift from threat to salvation. Dean staggered to his feet, the act raw and ungraceful, his breath ragged as he clutched the dog to his chest like a lifeline. Headlights swept the alley's mouth, urging speed, and Dean bolted toward his apartment, the rescue sealed in that irreversible grip, messy, bloodied, but undeniably real, a commitment forged in the downpour. Inside the dim sanctuary of Dean's apartment, the door slammed shut against the storm's roar, sealing them in a space that suddenly felt too small for the weight of what had just happened. Dean lowered Shade to the floor with careful clumsiness, the dog's body limp but tense, fur dripping water and blood onto the cracked linoleum, like evidence of a crime. "You're safe now, Mutt," Dean whispered, his voice cracking with an impulsiveness he hadn't felt in years, hands shaking as he rummaged for a towel, old and threadbare but clean. Shade huddled in the corner, eyes tracking every move, a low whine escaping as Dean approached, towel outstretched like an olive branch. The act was messy, blood smeared on Dean's hands, the towel staining red as he dabbed at the wounds, Shade snapping once more but pulling back a hesitant acceptance. Dean's mind raced. Parole be damned, veto's out there, but this is mine to fix. He offered a bowl of water, pushed gently across the floor, and Shade lapped at it warily, their gazes locking in a silent vow. The dog's ears perked slightly, a faint tail thump against the wall, the first sign of trust, fragile as glass. Dean sat back against the wall, exhaustion crashing over him, the rescue's irreversibility sinking in like ink on skin. Outside, the rain softened to a murmur, but inside, a bond took root, impulsive and raw, promising healing in the quiet aftermath. Shade shifted closer, not touching, but near his presence, a promise returned. "We're in this together now." The apartment's stale air hung heavy, a fragile truce settling like dust after the storm's retreat. Shade claimed the far corner body pressed against the wall, as if it could swallow him whole, his amber eyes fixed on Dean with unyielding vigilance. A low growl rumbled from his chest whenever Dean shifted, a warning etched in bared teeth and flattened ears, the scar on his flank twitching like a live wire. Dean respected the invisible barrier, moving with deliberate slowness, pouring kibble into a bowl and sliding it across the floor without meeting the dog's gaze, his own movements mirrored in caution. Silence enveloped them, thick and impenetrable, broken only by the drip of a leaky faucet echoing their guarded hearts. Dean sat on the edge of his mattress, hands clasped to still their tremor, internal monologue, a storm of restraint. "Give him space. You've both been caged too long." Shade's guarded looks pierced the dim light, scanning for threats in every shadow, his breath steady but shallow, a survivor assessing the new prison. Neither initiated. Dean avoided direct stares, turning instead to the window where city lights flickered like distant fires, while Shade curled tighter tail, wrapped protectively. The distance was mutual, a cold chasm born of shared mistrust. Dean's parole forged isolation, echoing Shade's ring-scarred defenses. Hours stretched the room, a battlefield of unspoken boundaries, but in the silence subtle shifts emerged. Shade's growls softened to huffs. Dean's shoulders eased. The apartment, once empty, now held two shadows, watching, waiting the first threads of connection weaving invisibly in the quiet standoff. Dawn filtered through grimy curtains, casting long shadows that danced like ghosts across the floor, illuminating the raw edges of their wounds. Shade's flank oozed slightly, the scar a map of old battles. And Dean, noticing from afar, fetched a rag and antiseptic, with hands that betrayed a tremor, his own scar itching in sympathy. He approached slowly, kneeling at a distance, the scent of iodine sharp in the air, murmuring, "This'll sting, but it's got to be done." Shade watched, body rigid, a faint whine escaping as Dean dabbed gently, their pains intertwining in that touchless proximity, the dog's flinch echoing Dean's internal wince. No words passed, but the act was a silent communion, Shade's eyes softening from glare to observation, recognizing the care in Dean's careful motions. Later, hunger bridged the gap further. Dean prepared a simple meal, scraps of meat and rice, dividing it unevenly, pushing Shade's portion closer with a foot. The dog hesitated, nostrils flaring at the warm aroma, then crept forward, eating with wary glances, his presence a quiet admission of need. Dean ate his share, leaning against the wall, the food tasteless, but shared his thoughts, drifting. "We've both been starved of food of trust." Shade paused mid-bite, locking eyes, a moment of unspoken understanding where their emotional wounds laid bare, betrayal's bite and Vito's shadow binding them. The room warmed subtly, pain not erased, but shared the dog's distant watch, turning observant. A bridge forming over the chasm of isolation. The afternoon light slanted through the window like a hesitant intruder, catching the dust motes in their silent dance as Dean reached for his coffee mug on the rickety table. His fingers brushed it wrong, and it tumbled, shattering on the floor with a sharp crack that echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Shade's head snapped up from his corner body, tensing, a low bark escaping sharp and instinctive, his eyes wide with a flicker of old terror. Dean froze, the sound catapulting him back prison mess hall, a tray upended in a brawl. Shards flying as fists followed Vito's setup, lingering in the chaos that earned him his scar. Not again. Dean's mind reeled, breath catching the broken pieces on the floor, mirroring his fragmented past. Shade's bark softened to a whine, his paws shifting as if remembering the fighting ring's clamor. Crowds roaring, chains clinking, Vito's blade glinting before the kill he witnessed. The dog's scar twitched, a physical echo tying their traumas in that suspended moment. Dean knelt slowly, gathering shards with careful hands, murmuring, "It's okay, boy, just a cup." Shade paused, no longer recoiling, instead, inching forward to sniff the fragments, his nose brushing Dean's fingers, a small gesture of curiosity over fear. The emotional tether strengthened, flashbacks, not barriers but bridges. The bark, a call that Dean answered with a steady gaze. In that pause, recognition bloomed, pain, shared not solitary, the broken cup, a symbol of vulnerabilities laid bare, pulling them closer without a word. Evening crept in the apartment's chill, yielding to a subtle warmth as Dean rummaged in a drawer, pulling out an old sock balled up like a forgotten promise. He tossed it lightly across the room, not expecting much, but Shade's eyes tracked it, ears perking for the first time since the rescue. The sock landed with a soft thud, and after a heartbeat's hesitation, Shade pounced paws, skidding on the linoleum tail, flicking in tentative play. Dean's lips quirked a rusty chuckle, escaping low and genuine, the sound foreign in his throat after years of silence. "Look at you, fighter turned fool." He thought the laughter bubbling up like light-piercing storm clouds, warming the room's edges. Shade batted the sock back closer this time, his movements loosening the scar on his flank, less a mark of pain and more a badge of survival. Dean reached down, accepting the gift from Shade's gentle mouth, no snap or growl, just a shared gaze that sparked safety. The play continued, simple and unhurried. Toss-chase returned the apartment, transforming from cage to haven, shadows softening under the lamp's glow. Dean's internal walls cracked further, the warmth spreading like fire in his chest. This is what living feels like. Shade's tail wagged fully now, a rhythmic thump against the floor, his body relaxing into the moment, accepting food from Dean's hand earlier that day without hesitation. Laughter faded to contented sighs, but the spark lingered, a flicker of joy igniting their bond, turning guarded distance into tentative companionship. The space alive with the promise of more, Night draped the apartment in velvet shadows, the city's distant hum a lullaby laced with unrest as Dean slumped on the mattress, exhaustion etching lines deeper into his face. The lamp cast a warm pool of light flickering like a heartbeat, illuminating the scar on his ribs as he absent-mindedly traced it, memories of prison brawls surfacing like ghosts. Shade lay in his corner, a silhouette of coiled tension, his breathing steady, but watchful, the scar on his flank a silver thread in the dimness. Hours had passed since their play, the sock discarded like a truce flag, but the air still thrummed with unspoken progress. Dean's mind wandered to Vito's betrayal, the switchblades glint in his nightmares. Why risk it all for a dog? But the question felt hollow now, replaced by a quiet ache for connection. Shade stirred paws shifting on the floor, his eyes glinting as they fixed on Dean, not with wariness, but something softer, a recognition that mirrored Dean's buried vulnerability. The fragile peace shattered subtly as midnight crept in the apartment's warmth, turning clammy under an unseen chill. Shade nestled beside Dean on the mattress, twitched in sleep, his paws paddling air as if fleeing phantoms. Low whines escalating to muffled barks that jolted Dean awake. The dog's body went rigid, hackles rising, like needles, eyes snapping open to stare at the window where shadows danced from passing cars, innocent but triggering echoes of Vito's warehouse lights. Dean sat up, heart pounding, his own nightmares stirred the switchblade's flash prison echoes, Vito's cold laugh. The tension coiled tighter as dawn bled through the curtains, casting jagged shadows that clawed at the walls like fingers from the past. Shade's barking escalated a frantic edge, sharpening each sound, his body a taut bowstring as he paced, before the door hackles a ridge of fury. Dean Rowe's muscles knotted his scar, burning like a fresh brand, the apartment's air thickening with an electric charge. A knock rattled the frame, sharp, insistent, and through the peephole a face materialized, one of Vito's enforcers, a hulking figure with a tattooed neck, eyes cold as steel blades. The afternoon sun slanted low, turning the apartment into a cage of golden bars, but the air hummed with impending doom, the enforcer's visit, a harbinger that Vito wouldn't wait long. Dean paced phone, clutched like a weapon, debating a call to his parole officer, but fear choked him. One slip and it's over. Shade mirrored his unrest, circling the room with low growls, ears swiveling at every creak from the hallway. The flashpoint ignited without warning, a crash outside metal on metal. An accident engineered as cover, Vito's car sideswiping a parked vehicle, drawing Dean to the window. There he stood, Vito himself stepping from the sleek black sedan, switchblade glinting in his hand, as he inspected the damage, his eyes lifting to meet Dean's through the glass. Recognition was instantaneous, a jolt through both man and dog. Shade's body erupting into motion, slamming against the windowsill with a bark that shattered the silence. His scar flaring red in the light as memories of the murder resurfaced the blade's wet sheen. The rival's gasp, Vito's cold command. The apartment door clicked shut behind them, a barrier against the world's intrusion. But the echo of Vito's blade lingered like smoke in the air. Dean slumped against the wall, breath ragged, his hands trembling as he pressed a cloth to Shade's nicked ear, blood staining the fabric in accusing blots. Regret washed over him in waves, crashing like the accident outside. I should have kept you hidden. My past is poison. Shade pulled away slightly, retreating to the corner, his body a shadow of separation, eyes downcast, but glancing back with a mix of wariness and concern. The silence stretched heavy and unbroken, the room's chill, seeping into bones already weary from the confrontation. The city's pulse quickened as evening fell, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for Dean and Shade, the apartment's safety fracturing under invisible pressure. Shade's ears pricked first, a low growl rumbling from his chest as he stared at the window, body language, a barometer of brewing storm, hackles rising, tail-stiff paws shifting uneasily on the linoleum. Dean felt it too, an itch between shoulder blades, his scar tingling like a warning wire. We're being watched, his mind whispered, instincts honed in prison yards flaring to life. Outside, subtle signs accumulated, a car's engine idling too long on the street below, footsteps echoing in the alley with deliberate slowness, a silhouette pausing under the street lamp before vanishing. The warehouse's cavernous gloom swallowed them, dust motes swirling in shafts of moonlight like spectral witnesses as Vito's voice sliced through the air. "End of the line, Dean." The threat materialized fully, Vito emerging from the shadows with two enforcers flanking him, their silhouettes hulking and ominous switchblades glinting like fangs in the dim light. Shade's growl reverberated off rusted beams, body low and predatory, positioning himself before Dean hackles a bristling crown of defiance. Dean's back pressed against a crumbling wall. Heart a war drum, his scar searing, as if reopened the danger explicit now, no more games. In the warehouse's suffocating haze, time stretched thin as a blade's edge, the chaos pausing in a suspended breath as Vito's switchblade hovered poised for the killing strike on Shade's exposed throat. Dean bloodied and cornered locked eyes with the dog amber orbs fierce with unwavering loyalty, mirroring his own resolve. The choice crystallized tension fracturing into action. Him or me, no us. Dean roared, surging forward with primal force, tackling Vito to the ground, the blade clattering away in a metallic ring. His fists rained down each blow, a release of years' betrayal. "You won't touch him." A decisive act, transforming fear into fury. Parole's chains snapped in that irreversible lunge. The sterile hum of the emergency vet clinic wrapped around them like a fragile cocoon. Fluorescent lights casting a pale glow over the tiled floor, where bloodstains had been hastily mopped away. Dean sat in the waiting room, elbows on knees staring at the linoleum patterned with faint scuffs, his hands still smeared with dried crimson. Shade's his own, a mingled testament to the warehouse frenzy. The air smelled of antiseptic and quiet desperation, a far cry from the chaos of sirens and flashing lights that had descended upon Vito's defeat. Police had arrived, cuffing the gang leader amid shouts and struggles, but Dean's world had narrowed to Shade's limp form carried here in a haze of urgency. Now in this limbo he decompressed slowly, breaths drawing out long and deliberate, each one pulling the tension from his shoulders like threads from a worn cloth. The vet emerged, voice soft as she updated wounds stitched, ribs bound, rest prescribed, no miracles, just time. Dean nodded, words unnecessary, his scar aching dully under bandages of his own, a shared map of survival. Shade was wheeled out on a cart, groggy from sedatives, eyes half-lidded, but seeking Dean's face in the blur. He knelt beside Hand, hovering before resting lightly on the dog's flank, the touch minimal, a whisper of connection in the vast emotional void that followed the storm. No dialogue filled the space, only the distant beep of monitors and the soft rustle of Shade's breathing syncing with Dean's in unhurried rhythm. The clinic's peace settled over them, fragile and earned movements deliberate, Dean rising slowly, signing forms with a pen that felt heavy, wheeling Shade to the cab outside. Regret lingered faintly, a shadow of what-ifs, but survival's quiet claimed the moment-long sentences of thought unwinding in his mind. "We made it, boy. The fight's over for now." The void wasn't empty, but healing, a pause where adrenaline faded into reflection, their bond the only anchor in the hush. Back in the apartment, days blurred into a steady rhythm of recovery. The city's noise muted through drawn curtains that filtered sunlight into golden veils, softening the edges of their shared scars. Dean moved with deliberate care, preparing meals, simple bowls of kibble and stew, placing them on the floor, where Shade could reach without strain, the scent of warm food, weaving through the air like a gentle invitation. Shade, bandaged and slow, followed Dean's shadow across the room, paws patting softly on the linoleum, his amber eyes locking with Dean's in prolonged gazes that spoke volumes without a sound, a silent dialogue of gratitude and understanding. Small gestures accumulated like layers of trust, Dean's hand extending a treat palm up Shade's nose, brushing it before accepting the contact, warm and electric fur against skin, sending shivers of connection. They ate together, Dean cross-legged on the floor, Shade lying close, their breaths sinking in a steady tempo that mirrored the heartbeat of healing. Inhale the pain, exhale the release. Sensory details enveloped them, the faint rustle of Shade's tail thumping once, twice against the rug, the warmth of sunlight on their forms as they rested side by side, Dean's fingers idly tracing the edges of Shade's bandage, feeling the rise and fall of ribs mending beneath. Emotions intertwined Dean's internal monologue, a quiet stream. We're both broken, but together we're piecing it back. Shade responded in kind, leaning into Dean's side during naps, his weight a comforting pressure that eased the man's lingering voids of isolation. Over time, the bond deepened silently. Shade standing guard at the window, ears perking at distant sounds, while Dean offered water from his own cup, a shared sip, symbolizing equality and vulnerability. The apartment filled with interwoven behaviors, Dean whistling low tunes from his past, Shade's head tilting in curiosity. Walks resumed short and slow leashes, unnecessary as they moved in unison steps, matching like echoes. Healing flowed two-way, Dean's anger softening under Shade's steady gaze, the dog's wariness dissolving in Dean's consistent presence. Sensory-rich moments built the foundation, the crackle of a treat bag, the soft sigh of contentment, the intertwined sense of fur and soap. Their recovery arcs mirrored perfectly small actions accumulating into profound change, the silence not empty, but rich with unspoken promises forging a deeper alliance against the world's shadows.